there's quite a lot of things that we share interest in. So maybe a good place to start would be with kind of mystical experience, because I personally had a kind of spontaneous mystical experience at a young age, and I understand you had a similar kind of spontaneous mystical experience.
Yes, I had. Although the term mystical experience is so artificial, but I have found that it's the most proper way to refer to it, although it's a bit corny, but it captures something essential about the experience, the ineffability, and the I don't know if it's life transforming for me, but it's like worldview changing experience.
So what happened for you? I mean, I know it's by definition it's hard to put into words, but
yeah, it was about 11 years ago. I was working from home, like at distance. It was a clear winter day. I was doing philosophy research back then, and actually I was working on philosophy of mind and the hard problem of consciousness. And I had just defended my PhD in philosophy on theories of reference, and then I thought, now I will focus on philosophy of mind, which is my passion. And there I was thinking about the epistemic gap, and it somehow struck me that consciousness is concrete and fundamental, and everything else we know merely through representing it or observing or modeling, or somehow it's external to us and we only have this kind of immediate knowledge of it. And consciousness is this here is what is the most real thing that exists. And it's really hard to put into words, but I also saw how everything is continuous with consciousness. And this is actually, I come from a materialist background, and I consider myself as a materialist or physicalist and a naturalist. So I think that consciousness is literally a neuronal process, or some kind of physical process, probably in the brain. At least the brain is a necessary condition for consciousness. Then there are these extended cognition theories and active inference theories that partly situate consciousness outside the brain. But anyways, it's physical. But if consciousness is physical, if this is physical, does it tell more about consciousness or about matter? Because of this epistemic gap, because we cannot even infer the existence of consciousness by reading science alone, and it's logically possible that you wouldn't have consciousness, although I think it's a bit unethical or like problematic to say this, to like doubt your thoughts and feelings, their existence. But it's logically possible, as demonstrated by solipsism. So there is this gap between science and consciousness. There's this some kind of dualism. And where does this dualism come from? So I felt that it's the dualism between representation and the represented, or my sensations and the sensed. Like here, you are there in London, and I know, if we forget about solipsism and all these stupid logical possibilities, I know that you are conscious. I know that your expressions and your words, they are produced by your thoughts and your mind. So you are the underlying cause of my perceptions, the hidden cause of my perceptions. That's something out there that moves the pointer readings, like Arthur Eddington says. So that's somehow, it's fundamental. Consciousness is fundamental, and it was really moving experience. It was an emotional experience. I became a vegetarian after that, and I felt this like deep sympathy towards everything that exists, like living beings.
Right. I think the the feeling of, you described consciousness as concrete, as I guess, as opposed to abstract, right? It's not like a model. It's this real thing that genuinely exists. And I think I definitely have had the same experience of, but I mean, we'll get into, for me, I think of consciousness as emergent and as just existing in systems like myself, but perhaps not in atoms. But despite that, I still share this intuition of concreteness, where I would say, even though there are parts of the universe that are not conscious in my worldview, where there is consciousness, it's just as real as anything else, as the stuff studied by physics. And I understand the intuition of saying it's actually more real in the sense that those are just models that we have of the physical world, whereas this is it. I mean, I know you've read around kind of Zen Buddhism, and I think Alan Watts has a book called You're It, and it's this kind of, it's hard to say what it is, but it's the thing that reality is, and this experience is it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You also mentioned kind of this idea of thisness in Zen as well, as something I know you've spoken about and on your YouTube channel. Do you find that's a useful way of referring to this concreteness?
I think that's a good way to capture the epistemics, because when I say that consciousness is the most concrete thing, it only applies to myself. Like it's an epistemic point. Well, it's also a metaphysical point, but I like to emphasize this epistemics because I don't really like metaphysics, because it easily goes to this abstract play with words. But on the epistemic side, it's demonstrated by these Cartesian thought experiments, or by Plato's cave. I think it's this kind of insight or intuition that is shared by most cultures. The idea that what we perceive is somehow only the surface, that there is some underlying concrete reality beyond that surface. And now, quite concretely, we have these computer screens here between us as the surfaces. But is it somehow possible to transcend that surface and really connect with another person? That's an interesting question in its own right. But anyway, this like concreteness for me myself, this is the only physical process that I am, and everything else is distinct from me or outside my Markov blanket, or how would you theorize it? I don't know. And you said that it's as concrete as anything other that is physical, like lightnings and atoms and photosynthesis and so on. But I know this process differently than I know photosynthesis. But it's of the same general kind that is physical.
Right. And so, I mean, I think it's a nice way of thinking about this, the gap being between the real thing, which is this experience, and then the model of it, right? So I've heard you say that science is a picture of reality, and it's this idea that the map is not the territory. And I think this is a mistake that a lot of people in science fall into, right? If they've not had a kind of mystical experience where they realize that reality itself can't really be put into words. Like this, the essence of being can't be, it's not the same thing as a model. And everything we say about it is a model. So I think you and I share this feeling that that's really important, that we're very clear that all of science, everything science says is models. It's not really the thing in itself.
Yeah. You put it really nicely. Somehow the difference between the model and the modeled, and many people, when I talk with them, they say it's just trivial. Of course, the word is not the object, or the model is not the modeled. What are you talking about? And they don't somehow share this enthusiasm about this idea. So it's somehow different to personally experience it and feel it in your guts than to just abstractly understand that the word is not the object. At least I myself have this sense of mystery, which is a bit almost irrational sense of mystery at the face of existence, my own existence and everything else. I know it's all of the same kind of matter, same kinds of physical processes. Essentially, everything is made of atoms, and it all comes from the same energy from the Big Bang. It just takes different forms, this energy. Nothing is added, nothing is taken out. The first law of thermodynamics. But this mystery of how ineffable this my own existence is, I cannot put it into words, and how little I know about everything beyond this existence, my own existence. And it's like it's good entertainment just to sit and meditate on this, on the wonderment of what is this. It's actually a Korean Zen koan, this what is this question, which lacks an answer.
Yeah, I think the people who don't share our enthusiasm for the kind of understanding the difference between the model and the thing in itself, to me, I think that might be, again, I mentioned because of a lack of experience of these mystical experiences for those people, but it feels to me like the reason a word like spirituality is necessary, and we can't just talk about things kind of purely rationally, is because there seems to be a spectrum where, in terms of how in our cognition, where on one extreme is living in abstractions, living in thought, rumination, models. And to me, in the extreme, that leads to depression. That's a state of disconnection and stressful kind of overthinking. And then the more you stop doing that and you move into a state of being present, just kind of, in meditation or in a psychedelic state. But if you're truly present and truly quiet and you get rid of the abstractions, the feeling tone is one of, as you say, it feels like existence is a miracle. It feels exhilarating and kind of awe-inspiring. And the scientist in me kind of struggles to say why that is, because this is why a word like spirituality is useful, I think, because it conjures up that there really is something there that's worth exploring experientially. That we can't build a model that kind of trivially dismisses, oh, that's just because your serotonin and your dopamine are going off, or anything like that. There's this experiential profundity to just existing, and I think for me that's why it's significant to me to know when I'm inhabiting models and when I'm really engaging with the real thing. And I've heard of you talk about a kind of, both in science and spirituality, a kind of fundamentalism that you can understand as an obsession with the models, whether that's taking the models in science too literally and thinking the world is genuinely made of atoms, or taking the literal texts of a scripture too seriously, right? Is that how you think about fundamentalism in that way?
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing in science and religion or any other kind of ism. Science, of course, it's not an ism, it's a methodology, but it consists of theories and observations. And somehow science is more difficult to consider fundamentalistically because it is changing all the time. It's self-correcting. But maybe that's also one reason why it feels so rational to consider it as fundamental. So it's less irrational than to consider scriptures in the Bible or other holy texts as somehow fundamental or like absolutely true. But there is this similarity, like you said, of mistaking the map for the territory, so to speak. Although nobody admits of doing that. I would say that I was going to say that my everyday existence is typically mistaking the map for the territory, because when I'm like cycling with my bicycle and avoiding the obstacles and so on, so of course I take this, if you would call it like generative model for reality, but something is mistaken there already, because it's just our existence that is happening when I exist in the everyday life. Somehow it's impossible to mistake the map for the territory in everyday life when we just non-reflectively, we just exist a bit like other animals. But then when we start to conceptualize things and reflect, what is this reality? What is it all about? What is the purpose of it all? Or does it have any kind of purpose? So that's where we somehow face our own ignorance, and we become like afraid